On the website someday. Ask Patrick.
Someday.
There you go.
This on? Awesome. Welcome. Thanks for coming. I'm really excited. It's a pretty big privilege to be asked, so I was really blessed to be asked to speak today. I shared recently a little bit of something I've been just brainstorming and thinking about, and so then they asked me to speak, so I thought, well, I can share with you guys. Really, the idea behind this today, it's a little bit like Amy Young said last night. I feel like I'm starting a conversation rather than having a presentation. We maybe will even leave with more questions, but hopefully it gets us thinking in a new way, as it has for me. As Jim said, I work with Bethany Gateways. I'm a part of the member care team there, and we have about 100 missionaries long-term on the field, and then we also train missionaries. So I work with missionary students who go overseas as interns for 16-month internships. So I kind of help oversee the interns while they're on the field, as well as the leaders at all of their locations. So there's lots of different things that happen in any given day and year that we work through. You've seen a lot of the students around here, and I'm actually going to have a couple of them share as well. So you can hear from some recent missionaries that just returned from the field. So it gives you a little bit of context for what I do. I often mostly work with young people and people who are new to the field. I give pastoral and missionary care for a lot of the newer missionaries as well, as they go, even long term. And so often I think in that context of that adjustment phase, that transition phase, as they're adjusting to the culture in the field. So first, I actually would like to show you a picture of a building. You might recognize it. It is a building in Dubai. It's called the Burj Khalifa. And it is actually, when it was built, finished in 2009, it was the tallest building in the world. It's over 2,700 feet tall. Quite a lot, quite tall. It's so tall, I often use this example. You can stand at the bottom, watch the sunset, then get on the elevator, go to the top, and watch the sunset again. So it's quite a tall building. The technology used to build this skyscraper was really new technology, and it kind of has changed the way that a lot of tall skyscraper buildings have been built since then. Once I got into this and really started looking at it, I became suddenly this like weird architecture nerd. Like, wow, this is so interesting. So the foundation is actually more than 50 meters underground that you can't see. I'll show you the next slide. This is a picture of the foundation that goes underground. So it's a triangular building and goes really deep. So it has pillars, steel pillars that go over 50 meters underground to really provide that foundation underneath for such a tall building. It's also right on the edge of the ocean. It's Dubai, so it's built in mainly sand foundation and right on the edge of the ocean. So it's quite a feat to build this type of building and that type of foundation around it. There's also a steel, have a hard time saying that word, a steel pillar that runs all the way straight up, all the way from the foundation straight up all the way to the top of the building. And this really provides a lot of the stability and also flexibility to flex with the pressures, the weight of the building, and then the wind that hits it on a regular basis. I think it's fascinating. Another analogy, if you place this, so the spire is just from the top inhabited floor. From there up, there's a spire that goes up. This is the spire. This is a human. So it's quite tall, even just from there. If you just took this portion of the building and placed it in France, it would be the third tallest building in Europe. Just the spire. So it's quite large. So you may be wondering why I'm talking about this random building in the middle of the Middle East, but you know, it's really interesting to start thinking a little bit differently. A lot of us are familiar with the member care model that Kelly O'Donnell wrote, and we all kind of look at. really just describes the different areas of care that a missionary needs to stay healthy on a regular basis. I began to kind of think about this model a little differently and think of it in terms of a building. I do want to point out the foundation is so important. It really is everything. If the building doesn't have foundation that will work and withstand the weight and pressure, the building will never last, right? This will happen. Right? Really cheesy little Leaning Tower Pisa, but truly the foundation is everything. The way the foundation is built is meant to transfer all of the load and the structure safely into the ground around it. So it's actually meant to take all the pressure and weight from the building and transfer it down into the foundation. Statistics show that the most frequent cause of buildings falling is inappropriately built foundations. So it really is everything. How deep and what type of foundation largely depends on the type of ground and the environment you're in. So if we begin to think about this in the model of member care, you all have a handout. If you don't have a handout, you can raise your hand. Somebody will pass them out in the back. We'll begin to look at this model step by step. It's the same areas of care that Kelly O'Donnell uses in his model, just kind of restructured in a different way. So we began to think about the foundation of care of a missionary as master care. It's really the foundation and stability in our lives is our relationship with God. It's founded in that relationship with God. As you imagine, the relationship of any individual missionary has with God is built or strengthened by the individual investing in that relationship. So as a member care provider, we want to come alongside to resource and empower and equip every worker that we have on the field. It's really a two-way street. That relationship with God isn't just a matter of, I have a daily Bible reading, but it's really a vibrant, growing, two-way relationship with God. I care for him and love him and seek to please him. He also cares for me and pours into me. And so it's really an important foundation for us. Like the Burj Khalifa, a well-established, healthy connection to God allows the stress and the problems of our life to be transferred into that foundation. So as we walk in day-to-day life, especially on the field with so many stresses and cultural adaptation and so many of the things that come along, that stress and that weight, when we have that firm foundation, that stress is actually transferred down toward that foundation, right? He can handle all of those things that are hard for us to take, hard for us to handle. So one of the things I wanted to do at this time was to give you a little bit of a practical, how do I actually help people grasp this and use this in their life? One of the things that I found in working in member care is that a lot of my job is actually spent coaching. Coaching is kind of a buzzword right now, I know, but it's kind of that idea of my goal isn't necessarily to just tell everybody what to do, though that can happen sometimes. But my goal really comes to how can I get them to ask questions, to find their own resources, to be able to understand and come to their own conclusions to gain everything that they need. So if you look at your handout on the back, I created kind of a coaching sheet that you'll be able to take and use. And really I just threw out a couple of questions. There's a lot more that we can do with this. But it's really that idea of how can I help any given missionary on the field identify in that relationship with the Lord, in that master care area, how can I help them identify what are my non-negotiables? This is like in survival mode, bare bones, I don't have anything else to give. What are the areas that I'm just not going to give on? What are the things that I'm going to make sure I do no matter what? Even through a crisis time, I'm going to make sure I have these in place, okay? So that's kind of the non-negotiables. Then from that, you want to look at what are my goals? In any given season, especially when not in crisis, you want to keep growing and adding to that. What are the things I want to grow in? What are the resources I want to do, or the Bible studies, or different things like that. So helping them identify what are my goals in my relationship with God, and how can I keep growing in that. And then identifying resources. Oftentimes on the field, it feels really isolating. And even in that connection with the Lord, you feel like, oh man, if I only had that bookstore and I could go buy a book, that would help me. You just don't have all the same resources. Helping them identify what resources they do have, especially with the internet now. There's so many resources online, but we often don't have the time to look for them. And so being able to identify resources. So what I'd like to do is spend a few minutes. I'm just going to have you quietly take the time to think about these questions for yourself. The best way we know how to coach people is by walking through it ourselves. So spend a couple of minutes thinking through these questions related to your own relationship to God. What are my non-negotiables? Like, if I don't have time to do anything else in a season of crisis or in a season of stress, what would I want to keep going? What are my goals in this season that I want to keep growing in? And where are my resources that I might need to look for? We'll take a few minutes. All right. Okay, next I'd like to actually have you make a little correction on your diagram. I just skipped that. I actually would like to separate out self-care, and on here it says mutual care. So if you want, you can put a line right through the middle of that layer and separate out the two. First, I'm going to talk about self-care. As you might imagine, from the foundation all the way to the top of the building, the stability of every level. Yeah.
So if you separate them out.
Yeah.
So it's the self, where do you want the self?
Yeah, I would put it right here and put this as self and this as mutual. Mm-hmm. Sorry, my diagram is a little off.
The teacher.
Oh, I understand. Yeah, so the stability of any building is really dependent, the levels above are dependent on the levels below, right? You can't have a collapse of floor 2 and the rest of the building just go on like nothing's happened. They really do build on each other. I'd like to propose that in some ways even the self-care and mutual care are really part of the foundational layers of a person's stability, in addition to their master care, their relationship with God. So self-care is one of the first steps in creating a healthy life and preventing burnout on the field and in all of our lives. Healing and caring for ourselves allows more resiliency and resources to give out from. Making a conscious choice to evaluate and address areas of work like life balance, coping mechanisms, and lots more areas. So self-care is not just like healthy eating and sleep and exercise and those things, although it is those. It's also things like work-life balance. How am I seeking to actually have balance between ministry and work and life and family? Investing in relationships with your family, also areas of healing that need to happen. The maturity to pursue healing in our lives. When the Lord or something else reveals an area of weakness or of pain or of woundedness, which often comes up on the field, to really have the maturity to seek out healing for those, to be sober-minded about where we really are. What are areas that I actually do need some help in? I need some growth. I need some healing. To be able to seek those out is all a part of self-care. I need to be able to acknowledge and understand the areas of weakness in my life as well as the areas of strength. I love that idea of like that sober-mindedness of truly knowing who has God made me to be, like in Christ's image, but what are also the areas that I can know myself, I can know my weaknesses, I can know my strengths, and be able to live well out of those, to be a part of community using those in both ways. Okay, so we're going to go back to our coaching sheet for a minute, and you'll notice some of the same questions, right? So in this area too, I'd like to propose one of the best things that we can do to help our missionaries on the field is help them identify how they're doing in all these different areas. So you can see, on your paper, it can be anything from health, areas of rest or retreat and vacation. Boundaries is one of the biggest areas, right? Knowing what's appropriate, but we're knowing what's not too far in boundaries and knowing what's not too little in boundaries. Work-life balance, mindfulness, truly knowing. For a while after I was on the field, somebody would ask me how I was doing, and at times I would find myself not being able to answer because I hadn't actually checked in with myself enough in a while to know how I was doing. I was just functioning, right? And so choosing to be mindful of who I am, yes, in my relationship with God, but also just like, how am I doing? Where am I at? So that's a part of self-care also. Areas of margin or even coping mechanisms. Am I going to coping mechanisms? We all have them. They're good and bad if you use them well and if they're positive ones. So we all need good coping mechanisms. If we have sinful coping mechanisms, we need to get rid of those, but also every good coping mechanism can become bad when we overuse it. So really evaluating, how am I coping, what am I using? It's not wrong, I work with young people most of the time, it's not wrong to watch Netflix, but if we watch like 30 hours of Netflix, maybe that's going a little too far. So really evaluating those coping mechanisms in our lives. So, looking at these questions again, what are my non-negotiables? So, even in times of high stress, what are the things that I'm going to make sure that I do, okay? Sometimes you can't get enough sleep, right? But you find other ways to cope. So, you want to really evaluate what are those things that I want to make non-negotiable for my health and my well-being on a regular basis. I added these 4 questions because they've actually become a really important part of my life. I didn't really talk much about my experience, but I lived in Bosnia in Eastern Europe for a year. I lived in Cambodia for 2 years, and I lived in Thailand for about 4 years. And a lot of the time when I was living overseas, I was providing leadership for other missionaries or interns. And while I lived in Thailand, I actually was living in Thailand, but also coming back to the States every year for a few months to provide a debriefing and reentry support for our seniors. So it was quite an interesting lifestyle for a while. And so I recognized, somebody once said to me, how do you really plan out your life to have health? You need to think of it in the big picture, right? And so I started looking at this idea of rhythms of rest and renewal. And that's where these 4 questions came to be for me. There's something that I regularly walk through and ask myself and evaluate every year at least. So what do I do daily that brings refreshment to me? So yes, we can talk about our daily time with the Lord, which is refreshing, but also just as a person, what do I do that refreshes me on a regular basis? What do I do weekly that recharges me? What do I do quarterly? Or I work with college students, so semesterly for me, 3 semesters instead of 4. And then what will I do annually that revives me? It's really important that we give permission for our missionaries on the field to take time to evaluate what would do these things. Don't just think of the rhythm of the time, but also these 4 R words: refreshment, recharging, renewal, and revival. They're so important for our well-being and our resilience long term. So to be able to help them go through these questions and ask, how do I do these? How do I incorporate these things in my life? And what makes sense in their context with the pressures that they go through in their ministry, all those things. And then again, we'll go back to the other questions. What are my goals in this season? Every season I want to have a goal of growing in an area, of really considering a different part of self-care that I want to grow in. And then what are my resources? Where am I, and where can I find those resources? So what I'd like to do is have you partner up with somebody near you and talk about this. Really kind of think of, how would I coach a missionary on the field? So you can kind of pretend that one of you is the missionary and one of you is the coach, and start asking questions. How would I ask somebody about these areas of life? The other person, you can be the missionary and you can make up whatever scenario you want. Have fun with it. We'll just take a few minutes. The most awkward part is this. The most awkward part is this. It's so tall. I'm like, oh, that's the wrong one. Sorry about that. Realize I have no idea what time it is. Let me go get my phone. I was like, I have no idea how fast I'm going right now. I got out of breath. I was like, I need to go down.
Not too much. She might stay up really late, wake up super early, that type of thing, you know. Sleep is actually my favorite things that are fun to me. I make sure that I go to decent time. My kids instead of staying up too late because waking up early is like that's my favorite playlist. So it's like one of those non-negotiables. That time for learning, I put some time to refresh it. So how many hours a night do you like try to get? I wake up at 5 a.m. So I always have to remember that, like, to go to bed at 1, and that's it, you know, so like, then I regret it. Yeah. So try to do that at the earliest time. What kind of things make you
I hope I'm not.
Getting married here shortly.
How long to go?
No, that's true. Yeah, nice meeting you. I might get so that's that one thing.
What are you laughing at? I just picked that. Oh. I'm like, it's not like wanting to They're brilliant. Right? Yeah. That would have worked well with you on the field, right? That would have worked well with you on the field, right? Yeah. No problem. That's so good. You should say that. Yeah. Say that. Really does. Absolutely. Awesome. Sounds like some great conversation. So how was doing this experience for you? What did you find? Was it easy to coach and ask people some of these questions?
I think it's easy for me to think of daily and weekly.
Yeah.
The quarterly, I don't know what, but then annually, then you try to get in a vacation.
Right.
So maybe that quarterly piece, I'm not sure that I can say I have.
One of the ways that, I mean, it really depends on the person and their situation and what that might look like, but I would encourage, one of the things that I started doing for myself while I was on the field was having like a one day or even like a weekend, like prayer retreat or something like that, where I could really step away. It doesn't have to be prayer retreat, it could be like a little mini vacation too, like maybe a combination, where I could really step away from the context and the situation, kind of take a breath. But it wasn't like a full-on vacation, but just like, okay, I'm going to just step back. Okay, Lord, fill me, fill me, fill me, you know, and now I'm recharged and ready to go back in. I don't even know what the R word is. Renewed. I'm renewed. Ready to go back in. So that's one idea.
This was really important here because I'm on the Christmas committee, and when our missionaries come home on furlough, they meet with us, and we want to hear what's happening,
Yeah.
what's happening in their ministry, but not focusing on them. And you know, making them a priority.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's really foundational to what is happening in ministry. All these things have to be in the mix too for that to be sustained and healthy long term. Yeah. That's really good. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry, I'm supposed to be repeating for the sake of the recording. Just mentioned that it was really, really good and eye-opening, because oftentimes when missionaries come home on furlough, you ask a lot about what is happening, what's happening in ministry, what's occurring, but not always thinking of asking about themselves and how they're doing and how they're being renewed and recharged. So, really good. Yeah.
I think in response to the quarterly thing too, depending on the kind of ministry you're doing, how intense it is, how stressful, how much danger there is.
Yes.
Some of the things that we would do with our team is, because we would have people that would maybe do an annual getaway, but that's too long because of the kind of work that they were doing.
Sure.
So that quarterly, looking at what could you do to get away, because you need those breaks to be able to breathe.
Absolutely.
And come in with a renewed perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Those quarterly breaks can be so renewing. Actually, I found that for me, they're a lot more refreshing than an annual vacation. Right? A lot of times a vacation, it's such a big trip, and you know, like it's a whole hoopla. Even now, I'm like, okay. But those quarterly retreats that I tried to do them even now that I'm stationed back in the States again. Just like I find it so makes a difference in how I'm doing on a regular basis throughout the year. Yeah.
And just one other thing is, whether it's churches or agencies or whoever you are, is providing resources. A lot of people do not know what to do with a personal retreat. They don't know what to do with any kind of extended period of time.
Exactly.
Missionaries don't know what to do with extended period of time with the Lord, or just with themselves. And so giving them, like, here's some options. We'll walk through this with you. You can practice, what questions do you have, and then helping them debrief that.
Yes.
Afterwards would be super helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah, again, just for the recording. So we're just talking about giving resources for those quarterly retreats. What do I do with an extended amount of time? Especially in ministry, when we're giving, there's almost like a guilt that weighs on us to take any time for ourselves. And so I'd encourage you as a member care worker, give permission for people to take time for themselves. Actually, felt kind of burnt out from this whole back and forth in ministry and giving, and even just recently went through kind of a discipleship course at my church, and people were like, this is funny that you're doing it, but I feel like the Lord said, you know what, I want you to do this for you, not because you're learning something to give, because that's always our default, right? I've got to take it and so then I have to give out, which yes, of course, please. But I feel like the Lord was like, you have permission to be selfish with this. I want to give you time for you and me. Not for giving, not for learning, not for anything else, but just for us and our relationship. And so giving our missionaries permission to do that, to just engage with the Lord, to just be refreshed, not with an ulterior motive of adding all this other stuff. If that happens too, then awesome. It will, naturally. But also just giving that permission to take the time. And yeah, like you're saying, resources. To find a way to utilize those retreats. There's some really good, just simple books of Bible study. How do I just find refreshment in the Lord? And I think Amy Young, her organization, I just heard they were doing she has an annual retreat that's online for women, but 1,600 people from around the world took part in it, and it's a retreat, a conference, but it's all online. So any woman missionary from anywhere in the world could take part in that. That's really cool. I don't know anything about it. I just heard about it on the last break. So, yeah. Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
So I'm one of Amy's students at Brecken. But this was just really good seeing you guys talk about walking the missionaries through things. I was raised that essentially missionaries need to be living out of a tent and you have nothing, and how dare you take a break. That was kind of how I was raised, and also as a woman, how dare you go along singly type of thing. And so going through this organization and hearing y'all is just really encouraging of it might take a couple times to walk them through and be no, you can breathe. We're not upset with that. We're going to still support you financially as you take a break even too. And so it's just really encouraging to know that other people are encouraging their missionaries and take a little hand holding. Or we had a midway retreat, and that was just really healing, where they were no, come and take this week and process and just breathe and be removed from your culture so that you're not thinking about all the ministry opportunities and things you should do. And so it's just really healing. So I just want to encourage you guys that we appreciate the hand holding and that too, of we're not going to leave you. It's okay, breathe. You're free to do so. Yeah. And so I really appreciate you.
Absolutely.
Just reading that
Sydney.
Yeah. Another resource that the church here can share is like Minnesota. Mm-hmm. Everyone has cabins or access to them to say, hey, you just got home from the field. Here's the keys to my cabin. Go and rest, relax. Keep hearing about people's timeshares. I'm like, oh, that sounds nice. You can share some of the resources that God has blessed you with.
Absolutely.
Bless a missionary.
Absolutely, yeah. Part of blessing a missionary isn't just coaching and spiritual walking alongside them, but also the practicals of loaning a cabin or giving resources, a car, things like that. What I do want to propose to you also is that it might be good to help coach missionaries through how they're going to use the time. It can be really challenging to stop and actually find refreshment, find ways to just be refreshed or just rest. A lot of times we don't know how to rest after our seasons of giving. And so help them have resources, like she was saying, for how to use the time and really truly to rest, to have that permission to really rest. Super important. Okay, we're going to move to the next one. So peer care. It's also called mutual care. Sometimes I say peer care. That's what's in my notes. Sorry for the confusion. So keeping in mind that each level is only, continues to be as stable as the ones under it. So we're building up in our building here. The relationship with God and health of self will provide a solid foundation for everything above it. So the next level is peer care or mutual care. This includes our team on the field, as well as our family, the local church that we're a part of, as well as the community that we live in overseas. So Scripture gives 66 times in Scripture it talks about loving one another, the one another's. These are really foundational to the way that we live on the ground and the way that we need to live. So, and some of them are challenging. They're not just love, they're all kinds of things, the one another's. I think we all can probably relate to some of the challenges that come along with team and working in teams, but there's also great blessings. And so helping us, each other at times, to see the blessings as well as the challenges is important. As we consider team life, it's often quoted in member care circles that the number one reason why people leave the field is team conflict or team relationships. Agreed, conflict happens, but I'd like to propose that I think it's a secondary reason that usually gets blamed. Oftentimes I think there's other things going on alongside of it, including maybe some gaps in our relationship with God and our master care and how we're stable in that relationship, as well as our own self-care. Oftentimes on a team, when I'm struggling personally, I'm more insecure, I'm more on edge, I'm more, ready to get into a conflict or be offended by conflict. And so then a teammate unknowingly can cause offense in me, and then that just starts to grow. Oftentimes on teams, it's hard to have that culture of talking things through and making decisions to forgive on a regular basis and really going after it, it begins to feel like my teammates aren't really my teammates, right? Maybe they're not really for me. Maybe we're not really together in this. Maybe actually we're kind of opposing each other in many ways. And that just starts to grow. I've seen teams from a very small conflict fall apart as a team because of something really small that started that way. And then we start making assumptions. It's like that lens we have, right? We can wear glasses and we can have a clear lens, or we can smear Vaseline on them and not be able to understand what we're seeing around us. We can see people through our own lens of brokenness or pain. And so it can really take teams out. And so really helping our missionaries identify what are areas of offense or of times when I'm seeing people through a lens. Times that yes, I may be hurt and offended. How do I fix that? Not just let it go. Not just let it continue to cloud the lens of how I see my teammates. Our own self-care, because we're not doing good, which led to us being more vulnerable to offense, then we're more offended, right? So they all kind of play into each other, as we can see, kind of going up the building. Not all offenses or conflicts are from that, but it can be in a lot of ways. Also, areas of woundedness or past pain that haven't been fully healed are kind of triggers, right? Somebody just recently was telling me that they were around somebody that just like constantly they were frustrated by them, and it was because this person reminded them a lot of their dad and some of the hard things that they had walked through with their dad when they were a child. And so they unknowingly were having conflict with this person, had nothing to do with the person or anything they were doing. They just like reminded them of their dad. So keep in mind those things. We're always looking through lenses. As we get more healing and wholeness, like I talked about in self-care, really going after healing, then we have less and less filters that we're seeing the world and other people through. So, like we said, as you can see, the layers and levels truly build on one another. When we can have healthy relationship with God, our understanding of what we need as a person, and our understanding of areas of healing that we need. So, for instance, I'm walking along and the Holy Spirit kind of whispers in my ear, there's something that He has for me to do, somebody to go talk to, somebody to care for. If I don't have that strong relationship with the Lord, I may not be listening for that. I may not be hearing it, right? If I don't have good self-care, I haven't given myself the resources, the time, the energy, the attention to be able to accomplish those things, then I'm not going to be able to do anything that He kind of like taps on my shoulder to do, right? They all end up playing into each other. It's really important that we take all of them seriously. And I'm just going to say it, as missionaries, it's like ingrained in our hearts and our souls that we're there for these people, right? It's all about them. It's all about care and love and for them. And so it is really, really hard to make choices, to say no to a need that you see around you to care for yourself. But longevity and resilience on the field will never last if we don't do that, if we don't make those decisions. And sometimes it can be a really hard call. It's really important to evaluate. And as member care workers, to help, that we can kind of help in that conversation. We kind of help people make some of those decisions, make some of those boundaries and calls on what to do. We desperately, sorry, I need to drink cold just a second. It's really dry. We desperately need to have healthy relationships, again, with the Lord in order to be able to care for one another. Peer care can include our team and our family, but it also includes the community that we live in. Often, for missionaries who are newer to the field, it can take a long time to feel a part of the community, and to even be able to see the ways that the community is accepting them and embracing them and becoming a part of who they are. I lived in Bosnia for a while, and one of the things that probably most frustrated me for a long time was that every single time, that's probably exaggeration, but like probably at least once a day, when I left my house, I would have little old ladies, like the little babushkas, right, head coverings, so cute, come up to me and yell at me that I'm not wearing enough layers, that I don't have on enough clothing, that, my internship partner always wore sandals. What are you doing? They're just like yelling at us all the time. We were always doing something wrong. And for a long time, it really frustrated me. at first it was like, ha ha ha, this is awkward. And then it got to be really hard and really frustrating. And I felt like constantly just like pointed out and ostracized. Everything that was different about me was like brought to the surface every day. And so it was really hard. It felt like I was being set apart from the community around me. Unfortunately, in this season, we had gone to be a part of and serve a local church, and the church actually wasn't really very accepting or loving of us either. And so it was really a challenge for a long time. And then, one day, something clicked. I don't know if somebody told me, I don't actually remember. But I started to realize that actually, they don't tell everybody that walks through the community. They don't yell at everybody, every American or every tourist. They actually had begun to see us as a part of the community. And so all these little ladies, they're actually caring for us. See, to them, me not wearing enough layers was truly potentially bringing harm to me. They have pretty brutal winters. It's about the same as here, and it's in the mountains. And they had all recently, at that time, lived through a war and didn't have heat. And so for them, there's like a reality to, if you don't wear enough layers, you're probably not going to last long, right? And even things like wearing sandals or sitting on a bench without a newspaper under you would mean you wouldn't have children, okay? So there's all these little things that for them were reality, regardless of what I thought of it. And they were actually caring for me. They chose to see me as a part of their community and include me in that. Once I realized, oh, wait, these people are caring for me, it shifted so many things for me, especially because the church that I was trying to serve wasn't accepting of me. It actually was the local community, the local Muslim community that started embracing us. And it shifted the way I was being cared for and allowed to care for them, right? Shifted my mindset. So it's really important that we help missionaries identify the ways that they're caring for their community, but they're also allowing the community to care for them. It's a two-way street. To truly be a part of any community, it has to be a two-way street. We often think of going and giving and caring for people outside of us, but we don't really think about that it needs to be a two-way street for people to care for us and to give into our lives also. The stress that I felt from a lack of peer care, I had a hard team situation at the time as well, from my team as well as the church. It was at least somewhat like alleviated or calmed because I started recognizing the care I was receiving from the community around me. So community can be one piece of the puzzle of peer care in our lives. So again, I'm going to refer to the coaching sheet. I gave you guys a couple of questions on here. Helping them identify, and it's really that re-lensing, like putting on different glasses to see things in a different way. Who am I caring for? Am I seeking ways to care for others? Who am I allowing to care for me? And in what ways are they caring for me? And where in my life do I lack care from others that I need to look and ask for more from? We're going to keep going instead of taking time to go through that more. So really quickly, we're going to go on to sender care, the next layer of the building. That's where most of us probably land. So this includes sending agencies, sending church, maybe even some individual supporters. Many areas of care that are needed from those that are sending in the sending team. They include a wide range of things like financial support, strategic planning, encouragement, resourcing, reentry and furlough resources like we talked about earlier, and like innumerable amounts of more things that I can't list on this page. The best case scenario, as we've talked about, is for the agency, the church, to be in connection, right? And to be in communication to provide a network of care for each missionary. Each missionary needs a network of care from different inputs to care for them, especially when you look at the life cycle of a missionary. From beginning to end, whatever season that missionary is going through, they need different inputs of care throughout. So like I said, this is the category that most of us are in, and we really need to consistently look more at how we can come alongside each missionary and help them thrive. Really taking them as individuals, how can we provide, and how can we help network with the church or the agency around us to provide the best care for them. I also added a couple of questions on here. I will let you guys look at them on your own. We're getting close to time and I really want to get through it. So specialist care, I'm just going to quickly go through this. This is really those levels of care that are needed on a temporary basis, things like medical doctors, counseling, crisis care, maybe education for MKs or even further career training, crisis contingency, so many other specialists that we need throughout the life cycle of a missionary. And then the last one is network care. The network care is really a little bit of a different category, but it's really the commitment of member care workers in every category to share resources, to continue to network together, to provide that net of resources around the world, and to help that commitment to continue to grow in knowledge and what we can resource missionaries with. Before we end, I really want to give a little bit of time. I have a few of my students here who just got back from life in a few different countries for the last 16 months, just to kind of share a little bit of their experience from a couple of these areas. So first I'm going to have Chris come. He spent 16 months in the Republic of Georgia. Just got back, so share just a little.
Okay. I'm going to share peer care. Peer care is something that's really near and dear to my heart. I probably wouldn't be here alive today or a Christian without it. So going overseas with my team, we were very close, but we kind of had like this silent kind of breaking apart a little bit. And the one thing that the Lord really highlighted to me during this time was we were never meant to like do things alone. And I see that all throughout my life. And we had to learn that if you weren't having good self-care, that ultimately was affecting you, but not only was it affecting you, it was affecting your entire team. So we had to like have some hard meetings and like calling out like, hey, yeah, you two are having a problem, but it's also affecting our whole team. So there was times where we would make it like once a month, we all gathered for a movie and dinner night. But we'd all sit there and truly be intentional and vulnerable with one another. Like what's happening back home. Like so many times there was issues happening back home and they were taking those issues and putting it on somebody else. And we also had to take the time to learn like what are each other's love languages. What expectations do you have on your team? Like I am a very clean person. And my roommate Nick, he's like my brother. He would leave dishes in the sink, and I'd want to kill him someday. But I had an unrealistic expectation, and just like we had to learn how to share these things. So yeah, I guess the missionaries you work with or your team, like just really encourage them in walking through some exercises, learning love languages and expectations, and encourage them to be vulnerable with one another.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Chris. Also, I'm going to have Michelle come. Michelle spent her 16 months in Garissa, Kenya.
So I want to talk about the retreat. So we lived in an Islamic area, so it was just kind of intense with the poverty and some of the injustice we saw. So I looked forward to Nairobi every 2 to 3 months, but I really started looking to Nairobi for the food and the clothing and wearing my hair down and speaking English, seeing other white people and not being looked at so much. And what I really liked what Amy talked about was the permission. So we would get the invitation to go to Nairobi, but the Lord really challenged me once and was like, why don't you rest here in Garissa? And I'm like, rest in Garissa? It's 100 degrees, like I don't get the coffee I want in Garissa. And it really was like, oh, that's probably why he wants me to find his rest in Garissa. So I really did appreciate, there were the times where we did, like as a team, there was no negotiation, like we're all going to get this rest and retreat. But there are so many opportunities wherever the Lord calls us to go, he will sustain us. His mercies are new every single day, so we can find that not just in Nairobi. We can find it in Garissa. We can find it in Iraq or Iran, you know. So yeah, that was what really stood out to me.
They're great. So great. So really quick, we only have a few more minutes, but I'm going to be a little bit vulnerable as a member care worker. When I started thinking of the model a little bit like this, it kind of started shifting some of the ways I've been thinking about member care as someone who provides member care. So I've worked with missionaries most of the last 13 years, off and on. I can look back and see that there have been times when I really have felt the weight and responsibility of how they're doing on the field. If an individual is not doing well, there must be something that I'm not doing to provide for them, to help keep them well. And it's really important for us to ask those questions to evaluate, am I providing what I could? Is there more resources I could do differently, provide differently? Is there a creative way I can meet this need? However, when I look at the diagram, one of the things that I noticed is that the master care, so really that relationship with God, and self-care, and even peer care or mutual care, as it's on here, all these areas don't happen here, they happen there. They happen in Thailand, they happen in Kenya or Georgia, right? None of them happen in Minnesota in my office. Now, I get to come alongside and encourage and resource, but all of those actually are owned by the individual missionary. I can't take responsibility and ownership of someone choosing self-care. I can't take responsibility and ownership of somebody choosing to really fight for that vibrancy in their relationship with God. And I think sometimes I had really taken on a lot more weight than that. I can't even choose how they frame their community and how they see the world around them, how they see their teammates, and what that looks like. This is not in any way to shift responsibility. The last thing I would want to do is to blame the missionary. No, never. But I really think that it's caused me to begin to think differently about my own job as a member care worker. That I've taken on oftentimes way more responsibility for areas that are not my own. That instead of being able to come alongside and encourage and resource a missionary, I've taken the weight of them completely, and at times have allowed the missionary to let me take responsibility for areas not going well in their lives. It can create an unhealthy dependency on me versus us being able to empower them, that they do have what they need, they do have resources, for us to help them mine out and dig out what are ways that they can continue to grow and be vibrant on the field, rather than being dependent on me to resource something, being so far away especially, right? I recognize that one of the things that we've got to do in caring for them is to sometimes help reframe some things for them, like I said. I want our young missionaries that are being fielded to truly understand that they have the tools right there within themselves that they need to be healthy. I think that oftentimes on the field, it can feel like I don't have what I need to stay healthy, to get healthy if I'm in a time of crisis, or to stay healthy, when it really might be lack of understanding of the power that they have already. So then it becomes my job as a member care worker to come alongside them and remind them of what resources they have, remind them of the power that they have to choose health, to choose even small ways to take steps toward being healthy and vibrant on the field as they go forward. Also, as a member care worker, it changes how I view my role. Like I said, I'm no longer in full-time crisis management of making sure everybody's okay and nobody's frustrated that I'm not providing something for them. But rather, I can now be free to come alongside and encourage and build up workers. I can proactively help them begin to reframe what's going on in their life and how they can start taking steps to be healthy. I can begin to send resources to them in a way that isn't panicked or reactionary. Sometimes that's going to happen anyway, but, on a regular basis. But rather thoughtfully and prayerfully consider what they need and begin to proactively help them. We can walk together with them. It's a different way of looking at it, and in some ways it seems small, but it's really changed the way I feel as I look at my role in their lives. I will close with what feels like a beginning. I said at the beginning that I feel like I'm just opening a conversation. So one of the things that it's caused me to think about is, especially for young missionaries that are coming up into the mission force these days, what are ways that we can really seek to empower them, that we can help resource and equip them in these areas to get healthy and to stay healthy as they go. So I kind of leave you with that question. We are right at 3 o'clock, but I will be here if anybody has any questions, and thank you so much for coming. Appreciate it. See ya.
You can just sink her to like
Yeah.
best feeling.